Right. Good afternoon, everybody. As you can see, hopefully, I'm now going to talk to you for about half an hour or so, I would say, on studying medicine and veterinary medicine abroad in 2026. Thank you very much for signing up to attend this webinar, but we always find it's a very useful thing to do at this time of year because it really is the time when you need to start thinking about your applications for 2026. So you're coming up to the end of year 12, you've got the summer holidays ahead of you, and you will be thinking about your UK applications. And we also think that you should be thinking about your applications outside the UK at the same time. But who are we to help you with this? Some of you will only have heard of us because your schools have passed on an email in the last couple of weeks. Basically, we've been in existence since 2006 now, providing information to British students about international higher education options all around the world. We didn't start out specifically being interested in medicine, dentistry, veterinary medicine, but I would say that by now, 75% of the students that we help are interested in these particular fields. So we've gathered a lot of experience over that time, and we feel that we're able to assist you in developing your strategy for applying to universities abroad. So how will you develop a strategy, or how should you start developing your strategy abroad? Well, I'd like to bring this back to you. Now, obviously, a lot of people start looking at universities abroad at a moment of crisis when they don't have a place in the UK, or when they realize that their grades are not going to support them getting a place in the UK. So a lot of people don't necessarily think about this in terms of living abroad. They think about it in terms of, I want to be a doctor or a vet, and I'm going to do whatever it takes. Now, on one level, that's absolutely admirable that you have such drive. On another, it might blind you to some of the issues that are going to come your way if you end up going to study abroad. So I would like you first and foremost to focus on the questions here on this slide. Okay. Have you really thought about living in another country for 5 or 6 years of your life? This is not something to be taken lightly. We actually find that the biggest obstacle to success, if you like, is usually motivation and maturity rather than academic smarts. So you've probably got the brains for this, but do you have what it takes to live somewhere else? Coupled with that is the fact that you're ordinarily going to have to learn a new language as part of your degree, obviously more so perhaps in medicine and in veterinary medicine, but it is an integral part of treating patients that you're able to communicate with them. Another very important question, but one that I imagine you all have the same answer to, is where do you want to work after graduation? If that's the UK, then there are some schools that are going to be better fits for you than others. But if you already know, for example, you want to work in Malaysia or Canada or something like that, the answers that we give you to where you should go and study could be very different. The other thing you need to work out is whether or not you're on target to get in where you want to go. Do you have the grades and subjects to access the best options right now? Because to be honest, if you don't, now is the time to think about changing that in the UK rather than signing up for a substandard option abroad. And finally, and very, very importantly, money. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about money today, but I do just want to put out one very, very important point about it straight away. And that is, nowhere around the world is funded by student financing loans. You cannot take the money that you get from the UK government to study in another country, which means that the biggest barrier most people face is being able to pay for this. Now, today, I'm going to be able to give you loads of information, but I'm not going to be able to solve this problem of where is the money going to come from. So having said that, what should you be doing right at this moment? Well, obviously, I would say it's a little bit early to apply, but it's definitely not too early to research your options. So I would encourage you to look at those medical schools or veterinary schools that you think could be interesting for you, and then ask these questions. The number one relates to, how do medical schools teach? Are they the same in the UK? Well, that's an easy question to answer. No, they're not. But in what ways are they different? And do those ways matter to you? So some universities, for example, will use things like problem-based learning, which I know some UK med schools do, but others don't. Some countries have a great emphasis on oral exams. You'll be expected to be stood on the spot and answer questions that your professors ask you. Some countries have negative marking, and in our experience, this has actually been the biggest issue that some British students have had when they've ended up studying in Spain, for example. Then again, check the language requirements, not in the sense of are there any, but to what extent these are actually important. Some universities might specify you absolutely need to learn the language to a certain extent before you can go into the clinical and practical phases of your degrees. And again, those practical years, does that mean you're going to be able or going to have to stay in the country where you are studying? Or might you be able to come back to the UK or some other country to complete those practical years? And if so, is there an additional cost involved in doing that? Then you need to think beyond the purely academic considerations and consider the fact, again, you're going to be there for 5 or 6 or maybe even 7 years. What about your quality of life? Um, is the university going to be in a place you'd actually want to live? Are you going to be able to make friends with your fellow students? What kind of accommodation options are available? And then importantly as well, to what extent are the term times the same as in the UK, which is really not at all. But this is an important consideration, I would say. And then again, right now, I think it's important for you to have realistic conversations with whoever it is who's going to be picking up the bill for you studying abroad. And don't just think about the tuition fees, but think about the overall cost. I'll give you a couple of examples of overall cost a little bit later on. Now, the final thing that I've put here is actually something that I regard as massively important, because you can go through all of the things that I've just spoken about there above and map out where you think you're going to go, how long you think you're going to be there, how much it's actually going to cost. But if you're not going to graduate on time, all of those considerations go out of the window. So I would urge you to ask any university you're interested in to try and establish what kind of graduation rate they have, by which I mean how many of the students who start in the first year graduate on time 5, 6 years later. Because in some countries that number might be rather low. Now, there are reasons why graduation rates in Europe can be significantly lower than in the UK, but it's important for you to understand why that happens. So please do research your options and get answers to all of the questions I've posted up there. Where are you going to get those answers from? Well, here are a few sources of information. I would suggest that you try to speak to students who are already abroad right now and ask them about their experience at the university. Now, obviously, this comes with a massive risk of bias, and it also comes with the risk that they will give you a whole load of information that's relevant to their circumstances rather than to yours. It might also be a good idea to speak to doctors and vets who've recently qualified abroad. There are an increasing number of these in the UK. So, there's a large number of people who've come back in recent years from European vet and medical schools in particular, and they should be able to give you some perspective on this. Please also bear in mind, though, that when they went to medical school abroad, the options that you have might not have been the same. There have been new medical schools opening every year since we've been doing this, and other ones closing. So it might be that 10 years ago they went to the very best choice they could, but that's been superseded by something else. So do be mindful that while they can tell you about the experience and integrating into the profession after graduation, what they probably can't tell you about is an accurate picture of what's happening in the world of university admissions today. Now, a couple of other sources of information there that are less first-hand, if you like. Online forums are of limited use and questionable accuracy. I absolutely despise the student room and Reddit, okay? Simply because there's so much garbage on there. If I was a kinder person, I might go there and correct all of the mistakes that I see, but I'm not. Okay, and it's a waste of everybody's time to do that because they'll just come back tomorrow again and again. There's an awful lot of, I don't want to say outright disinformation there, but people who think they know what they're talking about who really don't. So be very, very skeptical about these sources of information. Now, another source of information that you might already think you need to be skeptical about, and you'd be right, are agents. Now, obviously, I do have to say before I start speaking about agents that in certain circumstances, we are one. I'm not really acting in that capacity in this presentation. I want to give you an overall picture of everything. But it's absolutely fair to say that the reason I can afford to do this is because we work as agents with a number of universities, which I will show to you a little bit later on. Now, some of you might be tempted to think, well, actually, I don't want to apply through an agent. I want to go direct. In some cases, that might be okay. In other cases, you might find yourself getting into an awful muddle. And again, think about it this way. If an agent is actually helping you through the process, what's the problem in having them help you all the way through the process rather than just at the very beginning of it? Okay, because I don't like anybody else, I don't like doing a bunch of work and then having you go off somewhere else. The flip side of that is, as far as I am concerned, I can promise you that applying through us will never be more expensive or worsen your chances than going direct. So you've got that guarantee from us, but you won't get it from everybody. Now, there are some agents out there who are notorious for pushing people towards places that maybe they shouldn't go to, or they want you to stump up a load of cash before you've really made up your mind, or they introduce some kind of fake urgency into the whole process. Okay. If I tell you something is urgent, I can promise you it is urgent. I will never pretend just to get you to sign up with us. But I do think that agents offer a perspective that is very, very useful. You've got to bear in mind that we do this with hundreds of students every year, and you're probably going through this for the first time in your life. So just be comfortable who you're working with. I say that transparency goes a long way. But the other reason why agents exist is because universities actually like working with us, because we can provide accurate information to students before they get stuck into the application process that might be wrong for them. So, we do provide a valuable service, not just to students, but also to universities. So I've talked about researching your options, which is the key thing I think you need to do over the summer holiday, because by the time you're back into year 13, your schools are already going to be asking you, fill in your UCAS form, get cracking. So when should you actually apply to these medical schools abroad? Well, this really does depend on how you treat the UK. If you're not applying in the UK, then, well, apply when you are ready. Honestly, I don't think there's any universities that you need to apply to this side of Christmas. I don't think you'd be missing out on anything. If you want to apply early and get something tied up, then fine, but I don't think there's any need to do that. There are some universities where obviously the entrance exams are going to require a bit of preparation. So it's worth signing up to say you're interested in taking the exam early, but that's a different thing from actually applying. If you are applying in the UK, I'm going to expand on that in a moment. But before I do so, I want to make one very, very important point. You will know that the number of people applying for medicine and veterinary medicine in the UK is far in excess of the number of places available. So please be brutally honest when assessing your chances. Don't think that a below standard UCAT score will miraculously disappear, or A levels that don't quite meet the entry requirements, or GCSEs that aren't the grades that med schools are looking for. These things are not going to go away. So be brutally realistic. The UK process is going to take time to unwind. It's going to take time for you to get a decision. But if you're already going into it knowing that decision is probably no, it might be the UK applications are a waste of time rather than the international ones. Now, the problem with applying to both at once, though, is that they don't mesh together very, very well. So you might think, well, can I apply to a university abroad and have it as a backup plan and treat it as like your 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th options within UCAS? That's not going to happen, okay? There is no crossover between British and international applications. So all I would say is that if you do apply in the UK with the 15th of October deadline, if you get rejections relatively quickly, i.e. no interviews, you've still got plenty of time to activate your plan B that you'll be researching over the summer holidays. If you get interviews and then you you won't probably get answers to those interviews until, well, now mid-March, even later. It could go into May, June. Okay. And if that's the case, while you are waiting, some of the best options abroad are going to be full up. So some of the schools we work with in Italy, for example, their entrance exams happen in February, March, and you will have missed them. There'll still be options for you, but you won't have all the options. If you do end up getting an offer in the UK, and the first time you actually have a problem is A-level results day, then in this day and age, my first piece of advice would probably be take a gap year, because taking a momentous decision like this with no real notice period is not wise. But at the same time, if you do decide to push on, there probably will be Central European med schools and vet schools that are organizing entrance exams after A-level results day. And there might be a possibility to get in there. All I would say is that post-Brexit, because you need to get a visa, if you leave it that late, if you're a British citizen, you might not be showing up for the start of term. You might be, hitting the ground in a difficult position because you only turn up halfway through the first semester or something like that. So the later you leave it, the bigger the problems are. Now, unlike with dentistry, the reason why I've split this webinar off from dentistry is that you can actually, to a certain extent, use options abroad as an insurance choice, as a plan B, even though I just said you can't. You can do it, but it does come at a cost in terms of time and effort. And whether it's wise to invest that time and effort depends on a lot of things, specifically around the entry requirements and application process, which is the next area I'm going to cover. So what are the entry requirements at EU medical schools? Well, I'm going to start by telling you what they do look at. And the first thing is typically A-levels. Okay, your grades in your high school leaving diploma are going to be important almost everywhere. Not everywhere, but almost everywhere. I would say in my experience, if you're on target for AAB or better, we can probably get you in anywhere. CCC or better, you will have options, but they're going to be reduced. You know, and so that could hurt you a little bit. Below 3Cs, my first advice would be reset your A-levels. Don't be tempted to go to an inferior option just because they're offering you a place, because the places where that's likely to happen come with downsides. So don't rush into a terrible decision. This is actually one of the biggest problems we have around results day with people who are desperate not to retake their A-levels. And sometimes I just have to tell them, look, you've done nothing to demonstrate that you can become a doctor or a vet. You possibly can, but so far you've not proved it to anybody. Please reconsider. Okay. Now, in most systems, predicted grades work fine. So that will be what you're actually judged on rather than your actual A-level results. All I would a note I do have to say about BTECs and access to HE qualifications, these are not considered anywhere else in the EU for the purpose of getting into medical school. There are very, very few countries where they are considered at all. And where they are, they're not considered as good enough for medicine or veterinary schools. So what do EU medical schools not consider? What things are not part of the process that you might expect would be? Well, interviews, these happen occasionally. You're going to hear from a university who's going to contradict me on that in a few moments. But they're not always a part of the process, okay? UCAT scores, useful information for me, but not really important in the greater scheme of things. There were a few medical schools that used to rely on the BMAT, but they no longer do that. I don't think any of them are switched over to specifically looking at UCAT scores right now. You might find the odd one or two would consider it. Work experience and EPQs, these are also not going to be considered. The reason for that is they're trying to judge every applicant from around the planet on a level playing field. And, you know, in some countries, the equivalents of these things just don't exist. So they can't really, in all fairness, take it into consideration for British applicants. And then personal statements and academic references, these are used occasionally. Some universities are definitely going to want to see a motivation letter from you. Some are going to want to see an academic referee writing about you as well, but by no means all of them. The main thing that most European universities rely on that isn't anything that I've mentioned so far is entrance exams. In some countries, this is the only criterion that's looked at. In Italy, for example, everything hinges on your performance in the entrance exams. In countries like Bulgaria, it's 50-50, your A-level grades and how you do on the entrance exam. And if your A-level grades are stronger, you might be able to balance that out by doing slightly weaker on the entrance exam. And if your A-levels are 3Cs, you're pretty much going to need close to 100% to get in these days. Now, entrance exams are always different for pretty much every medical school, by which I mean there isn't one you can take and the results will go to everybody, okay? You are probably going to have to take as many entrance exams as there are universities you apply to, which is another reason why you need to have a very clear strategy as to where you want to invest this time and effort and where perhaps you don't. Because if you spend year 13 endlessly applying to foreign universities and endlessly needing to take entrance exams, chances are your A-levels are going to suffer. So, for example, there are a lot of students who've recently, within the last month or two, taken entrance exams for Bulgarian medical schools. I'm not entirely sure that's that wise because they do have another window a little bit later after you finished your A-levels as well. The Italian schools that we work with, their entrance exams are usually in February and March. What we would advocate, if you do make those to be your first choice, is that from around Christmas time, you should register with them and then every day do like half an hour prep on their entrance tests, not dedicating huge chunks of it, and not something that's going to really interfere with your A-level study. A little every day goes a long way, but please don't think you've got to take the entrance exam more seriously than your A-levels. Resitting entrance exams, really not a problem. Resitting A-levels, much bigger problem. Now, what is actually on the entrance exam and where do you do it? Well, they all vary, like I said. Usually you'll have multiple choice questions in biology and chemistry. That's pretty standard everywhere. Sometimes you might have logic, verbal mathematical reasoning, and maths and or physics is occasionally there as well. Sometimes you might have to travel to a university to take the entrance exams, but it is more common in this day and age to do it online. So I don't think that that's going to be a serious problem for you in that respect. Some medical schools will also exempt you from entrance exams if you've got really good grades. Say if you're predicted 3 A's, they might think, okay, that's fine. We won't insist that you do the entrance exam. That never happens in Bulgaria, never happens in Italy, by the way, but does occasionally happen. I've seen it in Poland. I've seen it in the Czech Republic. Now, another thing I suppose you could consider or should be considering right around now when you're coming up with your application strategy is talking less about the actual application to a university abroad and more about other things that you could be doing if the UK doesn't work out. Now, if you cannot get directly into medicine or veterinary medicine, you might want to consider a foundation year in the UK or abroad. You're going to hear a little bit about a foreign foundation program abroad in a moment. I would say that this is a valid route, but be very careful because in the UK, a lot of universities offer these pathways, but not everybody who does well enough on the pathway will be granted a place in medicine. So you're still competing at the end of the year. There is no guarantee of progression. So I would advise you never sign up to a foundation year unless there's a guarantee that it's going to get you where you want to go, because otherwise you might be wasting your time. Now, another very popular route and one that's often recommended by your guidance counselors in schools is to go to university and study, I don't know, usually biomedical science, but any kind of scientific bachelor's degree, and then apply for graduate entry in medicine or veterinary medicine. This is a valid route, but I'm going to tell you that the places available on graduate entry are small. This is not going to be easy. Okay. But if you are in a situation where your grades aren't brilliant and you don't want to do a foundation or you don't want to reset, you might be able to get into a UK university to do biomed science, get a first or a 2-1, and then be eligible for graduate entry. That might be something you can do. And if you're also in a situation where the finances mean that your only options abroad are frankly terrible ones outside the European Union, I would say that this is a better route than that. Okay. The downside of this is that if you complete a biomed science degree abroad or in the UK, and then you need to go abroad, you need to be careful because you will have to go back to the very beginning of your medical degree. You won't be able to do some kind of pretend graduate entry degree abroad where you get credit recognition for biomed science. Okay, it just doesn't happen. Where it has happened, there have been massive scandals around that happening, and the GMC just, look, if a university's on the blacklist of the GMC, it's probably because they've been pulling stunts like this. Transferring between medical schools, the idea that you might start in one place and then go to another one, it is possible, but you'll usually lose time and money. So I would say don't start this if you're already thinking, well, after a year or two, I'm going to move to this other university that I can't get into today. You probably won't. And a related question, or a related issue, sometimes we get people who think, well, I'll start abroad and then transfer back into the UK, into a UK medical school. This never happens. You might very well find yourself in a medical school abroad where German, Italian, French students are talking about this, and it happens for them, never going to happen for you, unfortunately. So now I'd like to move on from the process to actually talking a little bit more about what your options actually are and where these options can be found. Now, I am restricting myself to talking about schools within the European Union for the very simple reason that I think these are the only options you really should be considering. There are about 85 medical schools now teaching in English. That's quite a large number. You have quite a lot of choice. The countries with the most are Italy and Poland, but Romania, Czech Republic, Bulgaria, there are quite a few options there. Medical degrees abroad usually, or nearly always, take 6 years to complete rather than 5. but that 6th year is essentially equivalent to the first foundation year you'd be doing in the UK anyway. So it's not really going to extend the time you're at university, even though it's notionally, or extend the time it takes you to become a qualified doctor, even though the time you're at university is going to be longer. This is just, I said I would refer a little bit to money. I should have updated this. I've just noticed this right now. I did start updating it, but these are the rough annual tuition fees, not living costs or anything like that, just tuition fees in Europe. Bulgaria has actually gone up quite a bit in recent years, about €1,000 a year, but it's still the cheapest, most sensible option, I would describe. Italy, sensible if you can get in, but the application process is a total nightmare. Countries like Czech Republic and Poland and Italy, private universities there, those fees are pretty accurate. Cyprus is now a tiny bit more expensive than what I put there, probably about 22,000, 23,000 euros, but you can get an exact figure on that slightly later. For those of you interested in veterinary medicine, there tends to be one vet school in every Eastern and Central country that is teaching in English, with the exceptions being Poland and Bulgaria there. And there are 2 additionally in Cyprus as well. But there aren't a huge number of vet schools teaching in English, but you should be able to find one in most countries there. In both the cases of medicine and veterinary medicine, though, you're really not going to find schools in France, Netherlands, Italy, Italy will, Spain, most Western European countries don't actually teach medicine in English. So if a country's not listed there, it quite probably doesn't have anything that's going to be suitable for you. Now, another question that comes up time and again that I just briefly want to address is around recognition of EU qualifications. Obviously, Brexit has changed things a little bit, but not really too much in both of these fields just yet. The thing that's changed with medical school recognition is the UK medical licensing assessment that came in full last year. This, in effect, has created a level playing field because it means as long as you go to a university that's on the World Health Organization's list of medical schools and isn't on the GMC's grey or black list, you will be eligible to take this UK MLA, and if you pass it, you'll be able to work in the UK. So I'm not really seeing any serious barrier there. With veterinary medicine, straight after Brexit, the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons came out and said, well, we won't de-recognise anything as long as it's recognised by the European Association of Establishments of Veterinary Education. They have changed their tune a little bit recently, but nothing has really changed in reality just yet. The RCVS is looking into introducing its own recognition, but at the moment, anything that it does will shadow the process of the EAEVE anyway. Now, if you are interested specifically in those and you want to drill down into it in a little bit more detail, please do put some questions in the Q&A. I'll return to that if need be, but I would rather not get too distracted by these questions. Now, very briefly, before handing over to Eva, I just want to make you aware of where we can help you directly. These are the veterinary medicine schools that we work with, 2 in Cyprus and 1 in Zagreb in Croatia. And the medical schools that we work with are in Italy, Cyprus, Croatia, and Poland. There are reasons why we work with some schools and not others. This isn't always because these are good ones and the other ones are terrible or anything like that. It's just obviously we have got good relationships with some places. We don't have good relationships everywhere. But you know, I'm not interested in building up an entire network of all sorts of medical schools. I think I've got enough good options for you, and I think I can find something that would be suitable for all of you in veterinary medicine and medicine. But I'm going to conclude by just putting up there my email address and my Twitter and WhatsApp numbers as well. The website, obviously, there's a load of information. You've possibly already been there before. We do respond better to email than WhatsApp, let's be honest, with general queries. So please do use that if you want to get in touch with us at any time. Like I said already, you're welcome to feed any questions you have directly into the Q&A. But I'm going to stop sharing right now, and I'm going to invite Eva to spring into life and give her presentation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. So I'm going to start with a few details for European University Cyprus. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. So European University Cyprus is located in Nicosia, the capital of Cyprus. Currently, We have 7 schools, 12 departments, and over 90 different degrees, including the School of Medicine and the School of Veterinary that you talked before. And a few numbers here about our short profile. We have 37% of local students and 63% of international students with over 90 different personalities. European University Cyprus has a QS Star University rating in 2024, and we have been rated with 5 stars in teaching, global engagement, diversity, equity, and inclusion, online learning, employability, and of course, our medical degree. With the impact rankings, we are ranked amongst the 101 plus university for quality education. And around the world, we are between the first 1,000 private universities. Where located? We are located in Cyprus. I believe most of you know where Cyprus is located. A very small island with with a safety destination in the world, multicultural environment, a very warm climate with over 140 days of sunshine, blue flag beaches, and an affordable cost of living. And of course, globally recognized qualifications. Coming to European University Cyprus, you will have student support and different engagements with the Student Advising Center. With a personal support, you will have your own advisor. I accompany you with the whole 6 year of your studies, if that is for medicine, or 5-year studies if that is for veterinary. A career center, orientation, sports facilities and social events, and of course a psychology center for psychological support and mentoring. We are saying that we are one health stop destination with schools, medicine, dentistry, veterinary, and various health sciences school. But let me be more specific, and let's start seeing our veterinary school. Veterinary school is a 5-year course, a competency-based integrated curriculum which equips students with day 1 competencies. That means that you will start the first 2 years with the theory and the labs in the university, and the last 3 years you will be doing a lot of clinical practice in various clinics, farms, and zoos here in Cyprus. Of course, we are following the European system of evaluation of veterinary training requirements and other EU and international directives. Let me proceed with a few more details for the medical sciences. With medicine, dentistry, and vet students currently, we have 70% of international students. And here you can see the countries that we have students from. The last few years, the European University Cyprus has established a second branch in the center of Europe, which is in Frankfurt. So we have 1 degree and 2 different locations. So you are able to choose in which location would you like to enroll. The program of Doctor of Medicine is also fully accredited by the WFME, the World Federation of Medical Education. That means you are accredited around the world. And let me give you a few details for our selection process. We need A levels, and specifically we need 3 A level, 1 in biology, 1 in chemistry, physics, or math, and the 3rd one, it can be any subject you wish. Of course, a personal statement, an academic reference, and then we will go through the interview process. As long as you are successful in the interview process, then you will get an offer from the university. So I'm not going to give you any more details, so I'm opening and welcoming to your questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Let me just. Okay, well, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, Eva, for that introduction to the university. I would just like to say that I think that illustrates the point quite neatly that I forgot to make earlier, which is that some people get it into their heads that universities abroad are somehow inferior to British ones. This is absolutely untrue. But it is, I suppose, I can understand it a little bit when you think they are your plan B or your second choice, that you might think that way. But going abroad does not mean an inferior quality of education or an inferior quality of life. I do have to say, I've visited Cyprus. I used to live there, so I visited Cyprus many, many times. I was there in February this year, and I went out for dinner with some of the students that I've had there now. They're in the third year. And when I saw them in the first year, which was the last time I was over, they were all super happy with what they had there or the education they were receiving. And they were just as happy this time. That's not normal. There's usually something that they're unhappy about when I go and visit them. But this time round, they're all like, nope, it's great. The university's really responsive. They look after us. And if anything, we need help, then we can ask and we feel that we will be listened to. And I think that this is something the more you look into this, the more you might realize just how rare that is. So I think that those are compelling reasons why you should think about European University Cyprus. But I am now going to go to the questions. We've got a couple in there already, but please do put any more in there that you're interested